again, garden friends. Welcome back. The plan for filming today has changed several times. The original plan was to take you along with me as I did some garden chores, but the heat index got well above 100 today, high humidity, and I just decided it was not worth putting my plants and myself through the stress of pruning. I thought, no big deal, I'll just film in the evening when the weather cools down a little bit, but we actually just had a pretty good little storm blow through, one that wasn't forecasted. And while I am extremely grateful for the rain, I usually try to avoid pruning when the plants are still wet. When you have fresh cuts with a lot of moisture around, it's really sort of a highway for disease. And I have enough of that going on in the garden already. So today I think I'm just gonna take you around the garden and show you how I'm transitioning my garden from summer to fall, show you what I'm planting, and give you a few tips. My fall gardens are usually a lot smaller than my spring and summer gardens, mainly because it stays pretty warm here until mid-October, and then our last frost date usually hits mid to late October, so the actual fall season for us is pretty short. So the things I'm growing in the summer, tomatoes, peppers, a lot of my herbs, cucumbers, melons, they will continue to grow pretty well into October. The second reason is, I don't know about you, but I get really burned out by about mid-September. So I just prefer to have a small fall garden, something that's really easy to manage. Let me show you what I typically plant in the fall. In this bed, I have mostly cauliflower. I do have some ruby ball cabbage planted down at the very end. That's these purple plants here, and all of these little seedlings coming up, these are actually dwarf cosmos. I had one of those plants in this bed previously and went to seed. They're coming up everywhere in this garden, so I'll transplant a few of them, but most of them will be pulled. I do also have a potato coming up. I must have missed one during my harvest a few weeks ago. I'm pretty sure, just based on the location, this is the Purple Viking. It is an early variety, so I'm hoping I can at least get a few potatoes before those frosts set in. A lot of the things we plant in fall don't need to be pollinated, so our brassicas, meaning cauliflower, broccoli, kale, cabbage, carrots, potatoes, so you can cover them, and this will not only help with pest damage, which those are really prone to, but it also helps block a little bit of that sun, especially in the early fall when those temperatures are still high. My setup to cover these plants is really simple. I like using PEX piping, PEX. I think this is the piping that they use when they're building houses for like water to go through, but I prefer it over PVC because it's a lot more flexible. I just cut the pipes to whatever size I need, so shorter if you want a more low standing hoop, or longer if you want a higher standing hoop. And I just push the edges down inside my raised beds. The soil in my beds is pretty soft, so they go in pretty easy, but they're pretty sturdy. They stay up pretty well. For the row cover itself, when the temperatures are still warm, I prefer this sort of mesh material. It really lets a lot of that heat escape. It does let some water through. I still rely on these watering grids to do the bulk of the watering, but it does a pretty good job of keeping those pests out. To hold the mesh in place, I just use these large snack clips to clip them to the hoops, and then on the ends of the bed I'll just usually add some heavy bricks or some rocks. Let me show you these watering grids a little closer up. These are from Garden in Minutes, and I've slowly been replacing my soaker hoses with these. They're all weather, so I can leave these out all year long, which I couldn't do with my soaker hoses, which is great. That saves me a lot of time in the spring and in the fall. And they water actually from all four sides, so they will water the entire width and length of the bed. If you're interested in this setup, I'll leave links for the watering grid, the mesh row cover, and the clips in the description box below. In this bed, I have more cabbage growing, so this red piping is again that PEX piping, and I just cut it a little bit longer so you can see how much taller these are compared to the other bed. And over here in this bed, I have broccoli planted. Under this row cover, I actually have cucumbers planted, and normally this would be really tricky to do because cucumbers need to be pollinated in order to set fruit. The cucumber beetles have been terrible this year, and they've taken out a lot of my cucumbers by transmitting bacterial wilt. So this variety is actually parthenocarpic, which means it doesn't need to be pollinated in order to grow cucumbers. This variety is called Excelsior, so it's a great variety to grow in greenhouses or if you need to grow under row covers. I will say that parthenocarpic seeds are usually a lot more expensive, so just keep that in mind. But you can see some cucumbers growing right there. I recently planted several varieties of zinnias. I like throwing these in bare spots in the garden. I just kind of threw seeds everywhere. But these will mature pretty quickly and will grow well into October for me. And in this bed undercover, I have some bush beans and a marigold growing. Now, bush beans don't need to be pollinated, but they do better when they are. However, the rabbits this year have just been terrible, and I had to replant these about 3 times. So they've just been undercover until they start to fruit, and then I'll probably remove it. This guy is sort of an experiment this year. This is a sugar cube cantaloupe. I planted it a little late, so it's going to be cutting it pretty close to my first frost date to see if I can get some fruit. But again, the cucumber beetles have just been so rough on these this year, so I'm planting it a little bit late to see if I can miss that window when those cucumber beetles are really active. This butternut squash is another sort of late planted experiment. I am starting to get some fruit right there. I'm growing it up this trellis. Again, we'll have to just wait and see if I planted it too late or if I will get some squash. I did want to stop and show you this cattle panel trellis and how beautiful it turned out this year. So on the left side, I'm growing Martin House gourds. Those are those big gourds sort of hanging down. And on the right side, I grew yard-long beans. That's this kind of snake-like looking things hanging down. This was my first time growing Martin House gourds, and I've been pretty impressed with it. I was worried at first because none of the fruit was setting or getting pollinated. It was just kind of shriveling and falling off. But all of a sudden, I got 4 or 5 that pollinated and really have grown well. They're called Martin House gourds because you can dry them and actually make really pretty birdhouses for martins. Now, this plant is starting to get some blight, some sort of fungus, I'm not quite sure. So I'm hoping that I can get these matured and dried before this plant goes kaput. One of the things I always start to deal with this time of year is fungus on the tomatoes. This year it looks like early blight. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's Septoria leaf spot. Doesn't really matter because you treat it both the same way. Usually in both early blight and Septoria leaf spot, the bottom leaves are affected first. So I'll just keep pruning those leaves as I go up, so these tomato plants will really start looking like trees. But once I really just start noticing that disease everywhere, I'll go ahead and pull the plant. Some varieties of tomatoes will do better than others when it comes to disease resistance. As a rule, hybrids will be a little bit healthier than heirlooms, but I will tell you, these are striped German heirloom tomatoes. These are my absolute favorite variety of heirloom slicing tomatoes. They have done so well this year. They are starting to get just a little bit of blight at the bottom, but overall, they've done better than the majority of my hybrids this year. I do have a little patch of fall carrots planted. I usually grow Bolero carrots in the fall. They're one of the best storage varieties, at least that I have found. These look like they got a little bit flattened with all this heavy rain, but they should bounce back. Ooh, that rain did not cool things down as much as I was hoping, but one of the trickiest things about growing fall carrots is getting the seeds to germinate. Carrot seeds have to be planted so shallow, and when the temperatures are still high, that soil can dry out very quickly. So one of the things I do is I wet the soil first, plant the seeds, and then I actually cover the seeds with cardboard. And this will keep that soil from drying out too quickly. It will help keep it a little bit cooler, which carrots prefer. And I just check on them after about 5 days, usually once a day. And once I see germination, I'll take the cardboard off so those seedlings can get sunlight. These are the longest growing vegetable in my garden. These are parsnips. They're planted in early spring along with my spring carrots, usually early April, and I won't harvest them until after our first frost in mid to late October. If you have space in your garden to try these out and you can dedicate a space for that length of time, I really recommend growing these. They are so delicious, and that frost actually helps sweeten up those roots a little bit. In these 30-gallon grow bags, I grow sweet potatoes. Usually plant them mid-June, and again, I'll harvest them either right before or right at my first frost. And they grow really well in these containers. I've had good luck the last several years. This year I'm trying out a few new varieties, so check back and make sure you see me harvest these a little bit later. As we head into fall, it's still really important to think about how we can support those pollinators. An easy way to do this is to let your spring and summer herbs go to flower. So for example, this basil, the bees absolutely love it, and when they pollinate those flowers, you can then collect viable seed. It will change the taste a little bit when it flowers, but not much. It's still really delicious, and it's worth it to see how much the pollinators love it. Letting your cilantro and dill flower is another great way to attract pollinators. If you don't have any plans to grow a fall garden, or when your fall garden is finished, you want to think about how you're going to protect that soil over the winter. What we don't want to do is leave that soil bare. Bare soil is prone to erosion and nutrient loss. And leaving your soil bare means you're passing up on a great opportunity to actually improve your soil by covering it with organic matter. As you can see throughout the video, I use pine needles or pine straw as a mulch in my garden, and this will stay on the garden beds all winter long to help protect that soil. I use pine straw mulch because it's a really long lasting mulch. It will last me several years. But let's say you have a brand new garden with brand new soil, or maybe you think your soil isn't very good. Maybe it's really heavy and it holds on to too much water, or it's really sandy and it drains too quickly. Or maybe you feel that the nutrient quality isn't very high. Maybe you have to add a lot of fertilizer to your plants to get them to grow. One of the things you can do is in the fall, after your garden is finished, is to top your soil with something like chopped leaves, dried grass, even straw. Straw bales are usually pretty easy to find this time of year. Just make sure they're straw bales and not hay bales, or you'll end up with a lot of grass seed in your garden. These will break down over the winter and they'll add organic matter to the soil. And organic matter can do a lot of things. It can improve your soil structure. So with heavy soils like clay soil, it can improve their drainage. Really sandy soils, it can actually help hold on to water a little bit better, and it can add nutrients to the soil. If you're using chopped leaves, just make sure you're collecting them from disease-free trees. We don't want to transfer that to our garden. And also don't use leaves from black walnut trees. They contain a substance called juglone that is actually toxic to a lot of plants. If you're using dried grass or straw bales, just make sure they weren't treated with any sort of herbicide. And there you go. There's some tips for transitioning your garden from summer to fall. Thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to follow me on my other social media channels where I post short, easy to follow videos aimed at helping beginner gardeners. Check the description box below for more information, and until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.